Welcome to the IIBA Tampa Bay, Florida chapter study group for February 8th of 2024. Today is our 106th study group. We want to welcome Heather Noggle. She's going to talk to us about security. And we do not have a presentation showing right now. Your screen is not broken. Our mission here is to bring the best of business analysis to you. We've got a variety of ways for you to reach us. If you'll check in the chat, you'll see our links. We have LinkedIn, we have Zoom, we have Meetup, we have the IIBA, and if you found us, it's because you found us through one of those, I bet you. We are a volunteer-led organization. You'll see Cliff, our president, there in the Millennium Falcon. And my name is Thea Soren. I'm the Vice President of Professional and Career Development. Let's see. I can't see if Uche is on, but she is also one of our CBAPs on our board. And Bob is here. He's our other CBAP in residence. Bob and Uche being here mean that you get an hour of continuing education credit by attending this class. We have a variety of people that have been able to participate in our class and then go on to earn their certifications. If you are one of those people, let us know. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Heather Noggle. She's going to talk to us about all things security, things that you need to know as a business analyst, and I bet you she's got some new things for us.
Your screen is now sharing.
Yeah, it just showed up. Figures.
Let me stop sharing.
I think I've got it. If everybody can
You got
see
it.
what I'm
Take it.
showing, I have some stories to tell you.
Okay.
We were talking as everybody was joining today about this being a worldwide group based out of Tampa. And so Cliff Gray, about a month and a half ago, reached out to me and said, would you like to talk with us in our business analyst group? And I said, sure. And so we started arranging things. And he said, you need to talk to Thea. And I said, okay, well, Thea and I had lunch about a month ago. So I thought that'll be easy to do. Thea and I actually live in the same city. So that's one point of contact that probably shouldn't surprise you because we see each other at conferences and things like that as we're working through. In preparation for this presentation today, I'm looking in Business Analysis for Dummies, which is a book I have, and I'm flipping through trying to find references to security. And I get to the end of the book. There's a section in there talking about experts, and there are 10 different experts that have their opinion. And near the end of those 10 experts, there's Jonathan Babcock, which I don't know if any of you know Jonathan. He may or may not be a member of this, but Jonathan Babcock and I went to elementary school together in a small town in Michigan. His dad was my piano teacher, and so I about dropped the book and laughed. We are all truly connected. And so with that in mind, I'd like to talk with you today about cybersecurity and business analysis and how that's connected and maybe ways you haven't thought of. So how am I qualified to be here? Let's start with that. I started my career a very long time ago in public sector HR after a communications management degree from Southwest Missouri State University, now Missouri State University, which is here in Springfield. So I ended up at University of Missouri in Columbia doing work on my master's and started to work for that university. In the 90s, if you had tech skill, when all the computers were starting to take over how we did business, you got siphoned off of what you were originally setting out to do and into tech. And so I made a transition into tech plus HR and then eventually into full-time tech over about a 3-year period with another public sector stint in St. Louis, working for the county there, St. Louis County. I have a very long career as a full stack developer. And then after doing that for a great many years, all in the same place, 22 years in the same place, I was working with some major corporations on some business analysis efforts, full software development life cycle, specifically with data integration and making sure that when everything went live, there were no glitches at all. These are companies like GlaxoSmithKline, Nissan, Jack's Links or Link Snacks, Jockey Underwear, CrossPen, Suzuki Motors, and others, names you would recognize. So that's where my career has touched business analysis. I've never held a specific title in the field because, again, 22 years in the same place. I bought that company about 6 years ago with one of my colleagues when the owners of the company had zero plan for what they were going to do for retirement. And in a meeting where we were doing some strategy, instead they said, would you like to buy the company? And we found a way to make it happen. So I'm a business owner as well. And then a year ago, I stepped out of the day-to-day in that company. And over the last couple of years, as we were winding that down, I've really gotten pretty heavily into cybersecurity because it's in the 90s where all of the ability to make a business impact had to do with computers and all the processes around them. Now that we're in the 2020s, it's all about securing the information that we're working with. So the last piece on this is I do sit on a few boards. I volunteer with the Missouri Cybersecurity Center of Excellence here locally, the vice chair of the Springfield Tech Council, and then I'm also on the board at my church. Today I have 5 different areas I want to talk through, and I'm going to go through the presentation, but I want to leave some time for questions so we can go back into the presentation as I'm talking through. So we're going to introduce cyber hygiene. These may be all review things, but if one person in the call doesn't know some of these things, it's probably worth spending a few minutes on them. And the idea of information security and then business as actually stewardship to the organization is maybe a new concept. Information security itself and then training for business analysts. I pulled out a couple of ideas for you. Then that impact of information security within business analysis, and then wrapping it up with some standards and frameworks and some impact and how maybe that can be used as a lens in the work that we do. So introducing cyber hygiene. I didn't intend for this to go this way, so I'm just going to put them all up here. There we go. Password best practices. I give this as a training, and I have some training videos out there about this because this is where my bread and butter, really exciting work is on something that a lot of people are very bored with. This is something that really excites me. Passwords need to be long, strong, and unique. So if that single sentence, we can take a look at that. Then something that typically is 13 or more characters, never reused. So if you've got, for instance, a password for Target, you would have a different password for Walmart. And then you've got the strength to them as well, meaning that ideally you don't even know your own passwords, except for the ones where you actually have to physically log in and don't have an easy way to use a password manager. This is my second point on here. So best practices say that it is wise to use a password manager and not one that's within your browser. So some of the major vendors who offer these are LastPass, 1Password, and then there are some lesser known ones like KeePass and Bitwarden. A lot of companies have password managers. I personally recommend 1Password because it'll even make these super long, strong passwords for you. Next piece, we were talking about this as we're getting ready to have this conversation today, was multi-factor authentication and what a pain it is. And I instead like to look at it as it is the thing that saves you when someone actually gets your credentials. So if they know your username and your password, multi-factor authentication is standing there in a cape and a shield saying, sorry, you can't get in. And so we see a lot of data breaches and multi-factor authentication being that other level of safety. So one thing I talk about when I train is really expanding on that and why it's important. And if we can look at it every time we enter a code from our one-time password, either through email or through phone or using an app on the phone, that is truly super important. Moving right along, we have to update or patch our software. So whether that's the operating system or on our devices, iOS or Android, making sure that everything, we know what we have and we keep it up to date. And that includes our software that maybe we installed 4 years ago and never used again, getting it off there, managing it, etc. And then where I primarily work is in the cybersecurity mindset or awareness with organizations, and that includes super small organizations, 1 and 2 people, maybe up to 5 to 10, because there's a different subset of things to teach than versus, say, a hospital where they're doing all sorts of different things. But the idea is the same. The approach to it is a little bit different. It's the idea that all this information that we have and all these connections, it's all available now because everything's online. And I'll go into more depth on that in a little bit. We need antivirus or anti-malware software. Things like McAfee or McAfee, depending on how you pronounce it, AVG. There's Malwarebytes that my mother likes to shorten to malware, and well, that's not good. You have a need of that on every device or computer that you work with. And then, of course, you need to know what you have. So in my household, I need to know what computers I have that are connecting to the internet, and really also what Internet of Things devices, what laptops, what tablets, etc. That's part of the idea of this cyber hygiene, keeping things clean. In order to keep everything up to date and patched, we need to know what we have. And then backing up all of our data. That's nice and easy to do online now. There are inexpensive ways to do that, whereas 5-10 years ago, that was fairly expensive per gigabyte. But there are practices that we can do to back things up locally or use a service that backs up online, and ideally to do both. And in finalizing this last bit, this general overview of the cyber hygiene, and after backing up your data, there's a definite need to understand the types of fraud that are computer or otherwise digitally based. And that's called social engineering. You may have noticed over the weekend that a company in another country, I cannot remember if it was Hong Kong or Taiwan, was duped by a deep fake of a CFO and authorized $25 million worth of transfers, and it was all fake. It was all a scam. So the fraud of today is different than the fraud of 30 years ago, and it's always evolving, but there are some key things that are common amongst all type of fraud and how we as humans are susceptible to it. So some training on that is available. And then finally, the mindset of whether we're at home or at work, that we need to own what we click on. So knowing how to check for things that are potentially nefarious, etc. So that's when I speak of cyber hygiene, it is this a set of practices that we're looking at here. And if I can interrupt myself here, should I be taking questions as we're going along, or are they for later?
You can take questions now if you wish.
All right, I'm gonna
We've
take a
got
look
good
at
ones in the chat already.
chat. All right, yeah. Do you want to moderate that for me, Thea? And then I will just answer them, and then we'll move on to the next slide.
Yes, I can.
Right.
Japanda asked, what's the relationship between BA and cyber hygiene, and why is it important to BA as a BA and not just as a user?
All right, we're getting into that. It's the whole rest of the presentation. So if I don't answer that by the time to your satisfaction, then ask me that again, and I will bring it back up.
That's all the questions for now.
All right, very good. So here it is. I've been talking about information security mostly on the last slide instead of cybersecurity. So as we're looking in business, why do we need to care about that within business? And so it starts with a conversation and just a very general comment of everyone needs to secure information. Well, we all know that whenever we say everybody needs to do something, if there's not a policy explaining how, then it doesn't get done. So the evolution to that then is that each person needs to secure information, but that has the same problem. Well, how do we do that? And then there's what I was mentioning earlier. Everything is connected, including our fridges, our printers, and sometimes our toothbrushes even. Internet of Things, thermostats. Our cars are, if you're modern, they're connected to the internet, and our devices. So there's the why. Information security, or keeping private information private, is therefore cybersecurity, since it's all connected online. And so that's the link between where we've been talking about information security the last couple of slides here into what we call cybersecurity, which means that on this next slide, I'm going to define cybersecurity for you. Maybe. There. All right. I like to illustrate things with cats. And so the big data machine here has a bunch of white cats running it, and I like AI art. So there we are. You can look at that while I talk about cybersecurity defined. It is the people, processes, and technology working together to protect, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. Therefore, we are keeping private data private and enabling proper access to public data. And because we work in the earlier stages before things are actually built, sometimes, especially I'm focusing in on software because that's what I know, that if we have a mindset of doing these things, we can contribute another lens to our work of adding security into the conversations that we have as we're gathering requirements and working through how software is going to operate. This slide here, I think I might have duplicated this one and forgotten to take it out of here. So I'm going to go past him to this one because it's more in my theme. There's specific training I found for cybersecurity within business analysis, and it is offered through the IIBA. I don't know if anybody will be familiar with that, but it is called the Certificate in Cybersecurity Analysis, and it looks as though it costs just under $1,000, somewhere between $500 and $1,000 for training materials and work to get that certificate. There is another one called the ISC Squared Certified in Cybersecurity, so I'm going to break those two down for you coming into that. Here, the IIBA cybersecurity training, the link is here. And you can follow that. I'll make sure that this particular presentation gets in someone's hands so that you can take a look at it, or obviously you can take a screenshot of this. And it goes through these different areas that are highly business related. So the cybersecurity overview and basic concepts, we've started talking through some of those things, including what's called the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability that I mentioned on the last slide. There's your enterprise risk. So risk analysis goes into the work that we do. The cybersecurity specific risks and the controls we place around those risks to mitigate them, securing the layers, doing data security, users and the ability to access the things within software. And then finally, when you come to solution delivery and everyday operations. So that's the 8 areas that this one covers. Coming through to the ISC Squared Certified in Cybersecurity, this is one that I have, and the beauty of it is almost free. It's beautifully comprehensive from a business high level, and it goes through these 5 domains that I show here. And you see the 100 different total multiple choice items. They are somewhat tricky. You need to know your material and use your brain to decipher among the choices. It goes through those security principles all the way on through to security operations and the things we need to consider for business continuity, disaster recovery, and incident response, typically policies and plans there, as well as who should have access to what and how to intentionally handle that through the access control and some high-level network security. So those are 2 different things. If you find you have an interest in cybersecurity, you can get a certification specific to business and governance. These are far more business oriented than they are technical. Given that knowledge, I'm now going to shift into that impact of business analysis in cybersecurity, as you see here, and 5 points with this. We work in the business of change, whether we're doing pure analysis for maybe a later change on down the line versus maybe we stay the same. The next thing is what I'm going to talk about, shift left, and this is a real emphasis of that early work and putting security as early as possible in the business of building software and processes. And then a newer focus here in business analysis, this lens to use in discussion with stakeholders, and then finally the security built into functionality. So change and risk, and this is covered in the certification that's certified in cybersecurity, is your basic 4 ways to deal with risk. One, of course, is to avoid the risk entirely. Nope, can't do anything with that risk. So we're not going to go into that line of business. Maybe we do a bunch of analysis and we present that and we say, and here are the risks, and we include the cybersecurity related information security risks, and nope, not going to touch that. I've got that backwards. The other way is we accept the risk, and it's the exact opposite of this. Is we look at this and we say, okay, yeah, that's a risk. We could get a tornado here in Missouri or a hurricane in Tampa, but we're still going to live in Missouri and Tampa respectively. So we accept that risk, and cybersecurity risks are also going to be involved there in terms of what we're going to decide, the avoidance on the one end and the acceptance on the other. And then there's mitigation, or what we like to call in cybersecurity controls. And there are a great many possible controls to put in place once we identify a risk. And there are whole frameworks for that, that later on down the line, I'll be talking through those. And then finally, that risk transfer. Often in cybersecurity, that's insurance, trying to take some of that risk and putting it more on a party in case of something like ransomware, where computers are encrypted, data might be exfiltrated and put for ransom. And so that's one way to transfer the risk. So most of what you'll see in the way we do business with cybersecurity is some combination of these, or leaning a lot toward the mitigation, because so many things are not quite so black and white. I mentioned a little bit ago about this concept of shift left. This has some controversy to it, because you'll find some people in cybersecurity who believe that tooling should do everything. So we lock down everything so technically controlled that it won't matter what the humans and the users do. And then you have another camp where you see some statistics that say up to 90% of all data breaches are some human element to them, all the way to some people who are claiming that the humans are the weakest link in the security chain, which is not real helpful to to anyone in that way. The idea here of shift left, though, is a mindset in everything that we do to have some level of security in mind in our modern world where everything is connected. So I'll start here with the idea of software systems in production, all the way on back through that early conversation of we think we want to look into whether or not we should do X, and then the why and the how of how we do X, and the people we talk with. And putting that lens of security in those conversations with the stakeholders of who needs to access this, why do they need to access it, what's the least amount of information they need to do their jobs, and what processes do we need in place so that we can make those things happen without inconveniencing anybody, which is a hard line to go sometimes. We were talking about multi-factor authentication, for example. If a company comes in and they didn't require it on Monday, and they come in and there's no communication they required on Tuesday, there's going to be a mutiny, because it is a hassle without a plan. So the shift left is all about planning. I see a question coming up, or a comment. I can stop for a second and jump back in. We always say, yeah, go ahead.
It says, we always say security is a sliding scale. The more convenient you make something, the less secure, but you also can make stuff so secure it never gets used.
Yes, indeed, 100%. And that's where those compensating controls and the mitigation, in order to do something about it, we have to talk through it. And so the final analysis of what's going to happen and the agreed decisions and the communication about that, if there's not a compliance or regulatory piece that says thou shalt, then it is a company's risk posture and the conversations that we have that will determine how much security and how much convenience we do. If we don't talk about it, though, we tend to lean toward convenience and away from security. So did I address that okay? I can add to it.
Cliff, that was yours. Is that appropriate?
Oh, yes. Yes. I'm just saying that's just something we say internally amongst ourselves, being a data guy, and we are concerned about security, but it's sometimes you can lock stuff down to the point where people give up and they don't use it, and especially on new applications and rollouts. So it's always that sliding scale.
I think communication helps with that too, ahead of time, the why of these changes we're making for the sake of security and the benefit of them, especially if some of it is just the problem is in the initial adoption, whereas our habits will then take care of it from there. I was in a conversation today, I've mentioned it, as people were coming in with the tech council. We had 3 CEOs here, one of them including at our biggest hospital, and they were all talking about best practices in a technological digital age. And that was part of the conversation of, if you force something on someone, if you force a change on them, then they're not part of it and they're not changing with it, then there's going to be that mass disruption we all know of. You're not going to get what you want out of the change. So the earlier these conversations and this communication can happen in designing things, then the more likely the adoption won't feel foisted on a group of people. We know that. Okay. So our requirements need security consideration with this interconnected world that we have now. I would say that as I was designing systems 12 to 15 years ago, even in these big companies, we really weren't even talking all that much about security other than the obvious things. If there's data being transferred, it's encrypted when it's at rest, and it's encrypted while it's moving through the way it's being transferred. But beyond that, there wasn't a whole lot of conversation that really got into the granularity of what's going to happen beyond that. So what we can do then is we can shape the conversations with the idea that security is going to crop up somewhere in here. And if we get ahead of it and the communication of it and the business reasons for it, that we'll have a better product at the end and may have better adoption as well. Leading to security built into functionality and some explicit security requirements. And prompts we can use. We're all getting used to prompting if we're playing an AI. That's now, I think the word of 2023 might have been prompt. And the way we shape conversations, whether it's AI or with people. And looking at, okay, we've got to do security. What's that going to look like in the project that we're doing, and the analysis that we're doing, and the data we need to get there. And that includes AI as well. There are a whole lot of articles and conversations happening about AI and proprietary information making its way there. And so some of this functionality is how do we do our jobs? And I don't know if many projects are touching how AI uses corporate data in terms of this group, but I know it's been heavily in the news, and I know a gentleman who specializes on AI policies with the idea that we are going to be using AI, and we better darn well be very explicit in how we're going to do it, why we're going to do it, where it's going to impact, and what we shouldn't do and why. So I want to touch on a couple of more technical concepts that are common words right now. The idea of zero trust, and then that least privilege that's there. Zero trust means that as a piece of data or functionality goes to the next person or the next place or the next process or next function, that it's always verified its state. So if I'm going to hand you an apple, then you're going to check to make sure it's an apple. Sometimes when I present more on the cyber hygiene, I'll show two pictures, and one will be my smiling face, and the other one will be the same smiling face, but it's covered with a bunch of zeros and ones. And it's the idea that until we're absolutely certain, we can't say, oh, that was Heather a moment ago, so that's Heather now. So as systems are going through and there are steps and processes, et cetera, then that's one way to add some security in there, is how we're going to check. And my long career as a software developer, it was the idea of, if I'm building this function that has 3 parameters coming in, I'm going to check their data types, and I'm going to check that the information coming in, if I'm expecting a piece of fruit, it's going to be a piece of fruit, for example. So that same idea too, it also helps in quality assurance, because sometimes things are not nefarious, but if I'm expecting a piece of fruit and instead I get celery, well, something may have changed there. Some unintentional state change may have happened. And so we catch quality as well by adding some intentional state changes and security in there. And I realize this is heavily stilted towards software because that's my domain, but hopefully those will help to illustrate the concepts. And then the idea of least privilege, and this too has to be really well thought out and well done. Who's got access, why, and who should never access are questions that we can ask about new functionality or about making some changes on something that's happening already. And the who should never access may be a different way of thinking of things, but it's interesting to see when you go in and look at companies of, it's much easier just to grant extra access. And if someone does get a foothold into a computer network, computer system, we want to make them really have to work to get any further. And so that's one of the reasons for that idea of least privilege and then the zero trust. Does anybody have any questions about that before I move on?
I could tell you that's one thing we run into all the time with integrations.
Yep.
Integration accounts, just by default, everybody gives them God privileges. And it's become our standard practice over the last decade to limit those accounts, but you just have no idea how many are sitting out there with keys to the kingdom. And if they ever get compromised, everything
Yeah.
is available.
And those system accounts often don't even have multi-factor authentication on them.
No,
So
because you
machine to
can't.
machine.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And networks might have open ports, all those very geeky technical things, but that can be audited and that can be documented too if you know what devices that you have, how they're being accessed, et cetera. So going back to just those cyber hygiene, some of those early things there. All right. Want to spend some time on standards and frameworks because that can help put those lenses in a practical way. So there are the two I'd like to highlight. So we don't go too deep into, like, there's something called the NIST 800-171, looking at ITAR and all the government stuff. There's CMMC looking at controlled unclassified information. We don't need to go necessarily there because these are accessible to non-geeky people. So if we are mostly on the business side of business analysis, these are accessible to us. And you see over here on the right-hand side, I've got this graphic that shows identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. This is the basic, I'm looking for a word, the undergirding thing for both of these frameworks. The first one is the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. It's currently on version 1.1. If you go and look at their website, they do have a 2.0. And one of its major changes is girding around all of this is a governance idea so that all of these things then fit together. And so that's been a great addition. That's in public commentary right now. So the 2.0 is not officially live. And then you have the Center for Information Security, which is under this hyperlink, and it has 18 controls. And it's on version 8, so that's why it says V8. So CIS 18 V8. And in those 18 controls, there are 153 different safeguards that are attributed in there. And some of these controls are fairly applicable to us as business analysts. But looking at it overall and reading on through both of these will really help to understand why this is so important. And of course, it's all skimmable too. We went through that already. I stole my own thunder. I'll just leave that up for a second with my little AI picture. And then we'll move into the other with those 18 controls, 153 safeguards, and then the alignment with the NIST cybersecurity framework. Most of our emphasis in business analysis will be on protect items. So going back through that, identify, detect, protect. In order to get to protect, we have to know what we have. And we also have to be detecting for when anything goes wrong. And then these respond, recover often have to do with when we notice, well, one of two things. When we notice we've been breached is one. So there's an incident response and then a recovery. And also when we notice shortfalls and we have to make changes in our systems, those can be looked at as respond and recover as well. So how do these controls, these 18 that I alluded to, intersect with business analysis? And I picked out 3 that if we have time, we can go into a little bit of depth. I can pull that up and we can look through. Control 3 talks about data protection. And so data being all online, being accessible in multiple systems, being integrated. We have to do that very intentionally. There are 14 different safeguards, and many of them are in that protect category with a name like data protection. Control 14, all these 9 safeguards are about security awareness training. So taking a look at cyber hygiene, how it applies within the organization. I have a framework I like to use, which is a very basic level 1 of everybody needs training. And typically that's something mandated by compliance as well, that you have to have at least annual training. More effective to go through that way more often than annually, and to have conversations about security awareness that touch not only on the basic things everybody needs to do, but also incorporate the industry of the organization and some of the things it needs to safeguard and the risks that are inherent in the work within that industry. And then finally, at a level that's specific to the company or organization and its values, and what that means and the risks that are attributed directly to that organization that maybe someone else in the same industry might not have to be too concerned with because it's dealing with something else. And then finally, Control 16, if you really want to narrow down and take a look at this in very specific ways that help with business analysis, these are the first three controls to take a look at. Application software security makes sense if you're doing any work with software development lifecycle, especially in my area of integration. There are changes in the way that we develop software, different than the way that when I started in the 90s. I think there have been three distinct phases of software development, starting with the mainframe era and then going into the early web era and the client server aspects of things. And then more recently, modern software development, a lot of that serverless, cloud-based, et cetera. And you start to look at things like the open web security standards, OWASP. And the ideas behind that, the more general things are here in the application software security and those 14 safeguards. So you got 14 in the first control set, control 3. You have 9 in 14 and 14 in control 16. So there's a lot there I went through very quickly. I'd rather have a conversation and then I can poke into any of these areas through live access to the web or anything than to spend too much time lecturing at you, which I hate to do through Zoom especially. I love interaction. So what time do we have? How much time do we have to talk?
We have 20 minutes.
Perfect. I like it. All right, I'm gonna put the pretty graphic back on the screen and let's go.
Well, let me kick it off with a basic question, Heather.
Sure.
Business analysts need to understand basic security for applications. Can you
Yes.
talk about single sign-on and how that's managed in a company and what we need to understand about it as we are working to develop new applications and plug into it?
Sure. So I'm going to just jump back about 25 years. If you're developing software 25 years ago, you were writing your own login. So there wasn't any really good standard out there. So you'd be putting in your two little boxes, one for username, usually it was before we used email all the time, and then the other one for password, and that would be your thing. And you might put a password policy atop that says you need at least, 6 characters and move on, and your password can't be the same as your username. But that was how we did authentication, and there wasn't a whole lot of single sign-on going on there in the 90s and the early 2000s. If you look now, you have federated sign-on, which that idea is, oh, you want to use your Google, you want to use your Facebook. And so companies like Okta and others will enable all of that, and nobody writes their own authentication anymore. There's Cognito through AWS, and it's going to be interesting security-wise based on which vendor you choose, and then obviously how you integrate and do it. If you do any sort of homegrown, there's going to need to be some quality testing and probably also some security testing to make sure that that works. So when you throw out a term like single sign-on, it really could encompass just about anything. But I do recommend as a best practice that you use one of the major vendors like Okta because they've conquered all that already. And from a personal human perspective, I don't recommend signing in with Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, et cetera, wherever you can avoid it, because then if somebody does get access to, say, your Google account, whether that's personal or business, then there's a potential that that could be reused to sign in somewhere else. So I don't know if I think that's you, if you meant going through single sign-on within one application integrated with others, or if you meant that truly to be able to use one login in multiple places.
One login in multiple places. The idea that we would use the same login and the same password in multiple systems is a big no-no. I understand that. But
Okay.
I'm thinking of as we log into, like, for instance, as I log into Blue Cross Blue Shield, it will flash up on the screen, logging into single sign-on, and then it flashes 3 or 4 other screens before it actually gets to the screen I can do something at.
And you were at the mercy of the design by whoever did that, and it is a black box to you.
It is a black box, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But those corporate sign-ons, they're controlled by, you know, Microsoft domain controllers. Those are pretty secure. Having personal stuff with a single sign-on that you're controlling, that's a whole nother ball game.
Yeah.
But
Right.
your domain, like a Microsoft domain, which we use, of course, you know, for your Outlook, for your Teams,
Mhm.
for your, you know, that's all controlled through a Microsoft single sign-on, and those are corporately controlled.
Yes.
Totally different than personal stuff.
Yes. And we don't write those anymore. We use, like you said, a Microsoft, or in the case of my software, we use Cognito. So that's AWS.
We don't say
So-
but AWS.
No,
I work for
AWS.
Microsoft, so I'm biased. But yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll make a note of that to not say anything bad about Microsoft.
No.
It's
You
okay.
can. We're not perfect.
Kim has a question. How do you see AI playing a part in cybersecurity? I understand credit card companies use
Sure.
it for fraudulent activity. How will IT security groups be able to use it?
So a couple of different things happening with AI and security, one of which is the bad guys are using it to write better phishing emails, and they're also
Mhm.
using it to write better exploits. And so it's the tug of war with any new technology. The good guys are using it to write better code and to double check some things of work that they're doing. And also to detection is a lot of it things that may be anomalies, like you mentioned, in terms of heuristics and machine learning. So it's more that kind of AI than it is the generative AI of the chat GPTs, et cetera, of thresholds of, and I'm starting to talk in an area where I'm not as sure of how the good guys are using it as I am as sure of how the bad guys are using it. I do think that if we build good policies around AI, there's a gentleman named Walter Haydock who is super specializing in this stuff. So he'd be a great one to follow on LinkedIn or to subscribe to his Substack. He's talking about companies putting policies in place and how they use AI and making sure that data is not getting into the large language models that is proprietary. So that's one area. And I think I've meandered a little bit off your question. Do you want to let me know if I've answered that, or if
No,
you'd like me to go more specific?
Kim, does that answer your question? I'm going to take that as a yes.
Oh, she said yes through the chat.
Okay. Yes. Thank
Kim.
you.
And I could tell you one of the things, because we kind of talked about it before, is people don't realize like Chat GPT, it might be a great tool, but you know, you don't take clients' data and upload it to Chat GPT to get some analysis done on it. That's an open resource, and that data is now part of their system. That's where you want to use like a AWS or Microsoft Copilot, where yeah, they're using ChatGPT, but it's pointed at your data and your data only, and your data is secure.
And that's a big evolution. I haven't personally used Copilot, but I have seen a couple of really big presentations on it. I'm really excited for that idea of basically the private GPTs, the private large language models, where you can do that sort of work and know that it's not going into the analysis that other people will use.
Yeah. Well, and then you get garbage in, garbage out. You know, if you turn on ChatGPT and use the internet as your source, God knows, you know, the garbage that's out there, that's what you're going to get back. It's only as good as what you're pointing it at. I've always said that data is more important than the AI by a long shot.
And verification of the results that you receive as well. And that's one of the sticky, hairy things for security things as well. You know, we've seen it recommend, you know, you need to do this code and there'll be errors in it.
Yeah. Heather, one of my favorite projects for security was realizing that people were still using very old programs that had developer hard-coded IDs in them. And nobody knew it. And the reason they had done that originally was there wasn't a protocol or a standard for how to create security whenever they were writing those years ago. But they were still being used, they were still vulnerable, and we had to go through and create a protocol. What can we do as business analysts to help check the health of security in our organization, especially if there isn't a strong security presence in the organization already?
Okay. So if I have to extrapolate that out, I'm guessing that developers are not typically within the organization. They might be outsourced, and so they don't have the history. But yeah, you see sometimes that in source code, there's hard-coded credentials instead of configuration files that are on the production servers that are separate from those on the test servers, etc. How do we look at doing that? We have to specifically have a checklist of things of this is how we code. And these are the things we look out for in our legacy software. These are vulnerabilities we know about. So I mentioned OWASP. It is a little bit more on the geeky side, but they have a whole, it's OWASP. They have a whole list of things to check for and things that pen testers and the bad guys will exploit within web applications. So I can put that at the end of this. I'm gonna put a slide in before I turn these in about OWASP and things about API security as well. So it's
Okay.
to answer that, it's some intentional things to check for of we know these, especially in legacy software, that these things happen and these are things we need to make sure don't go into production so that that'll help keep us safe.
Right.
All right, I'm writing down OWASP. What's next?
Thank you. Folks on the call, what experiences have you had with security that make you want to ask more questions?
How might you deal with security in test environments? For example, if there's a release train where different parts of microservices components get advanced from place to place to place, how do you keep all that straight?
Well, in terms of complexity in a system, the best way to keep it straight is to document it and test it. So whether it's in test or it's live, we first need to know that we have the program or what have you. We have to know the current state of it and make sure it's tested. And then test development and test systems, if they're open to the internet, they need the same level of security as production. And a company I won't mention has learned that lesson recently.
We can guess now.
Yeah, you can guess, and someone left me a nice hanging curveball on that, and so it does. They happen, and the big companies are major targets because they're the big companies.
And I
We
can
have
tell you
another
with
question.
AI, you know, you can keep track of things like a user's IP address when they log on, and you can use that kind of stuff, because if all of a sudden you see an IP address in Florida and then all of a sudden you see an IP address on the other side of the world using the same credentials, those are the kinds of things that we've kind of always collected that data, but we've never had a good resource to go through it quickly and spit up
Automate
things.
the response.
Yes, and that's where Copilot or AI, a lot of that stuff is really coming into play.
Good.
Heather, we have another question from Julian. It says, what is good software to use to scan incoming uploads?
Ooh, incoming uploads. I have not dealt with that at the implementation level. And so I'm going to go a little broader and start talking about EDR, endpoint detection and response. So that could be not only uploads, but just all traffic, etc. I'm tool agnostic since I'm more of a process person. But the one that's been bandied about this week has been called Sentinel-1. Is evidently just really good at that sort of thing. And so that's going to be a level beyond antivirus, etc. So that's probably my recommendation by proxy of someone else at the Missouri Cybersecurity Center of Excellence who deals with more of the tech than I do.
Okay, great. We all have probably Microsoft Security on using Microsoft Office. Is that sufficient?
No.
What should we be looking at as supplemental?
Depends on the size of your organization. And one of the biggest things we can do is knowing that the configuration. So I'm looking online cloud-based. A lot of small companies think, oh, I've got Microsoft or I've got Google's, whatever they're calling suite. And so that's in the cloud and everything's handled in the cloud. So how we configure and how we manage these things is what makes it secure. And out of the box, it isn't necessarily going to be secure. So I would say the software itself and then how it's configured. Microsoft Defender does some pretty amazing things. So there's my Microsoft plug. You can pat me on the head, but you have to know how to configure it. So that's your level is the human interaction with the software and making it secure.
Yeah.
Okay, for
And
our
Thea,
personal computers.
I don't know, you know, there's a level of security, like you said, third party, where it sends you a text and you have to enter the code kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we've kind of moved past that. We use actually apps on the cell phone. And when you try to access something, it'll put up a code on the screen. And then you have to go into that app and you have to have access to the app on the phone and
Mhm.
enter that code to be able to get to anything.
So you're talking
So
about
it's even
Microsoft Authenticator and the way it
yes,
handles
yeah.
that. Mhm.
So it's a level beyond getting that text message where you get the 6-digit code and you know,
Mhm.
enter it in on the website.
Okay. So for your personal computer, is that something we should be using or is there something else?
For a personal computer, I recommend Malwarebytes as the best anti-malware software that's out there. If you are savvy, you can probably do everything you need to with Defender, but you have to know what to set and what to look for at a level beyond what I do. And so
Okay.
I also recommend for personal use that you secure your devices as well. So iPads and iPhones to have something on there. And then I use a VPN also when I'm connecting when I'm not at home.
Okay. Okay, folks, we've got just a few more minutes. What other questions do we have for Heather? Okay, Heather, tell us what you think is going to be happening in the next 6 months to 2 years in security that we need to be aware of.
More breaches. For the reasons AI is going to facilitate all the good and all the bad to be happening exponentially faster, just as it has. You may have noticed AI has gotten a whole lot better in the year plus it's been out. So I used to play around with Bard and it would lie to me. Google's Bard, they've changed the name to Gemini, and I've noticed that it's gotten much better. But the hallucinations, the deep fakes, where we're taking a look at, there was something with Taylor Swift where there was a video put out of Taylor Swift that was in poor taste. We'll leave it there, but it wasn't her. So we're going to
Right.
see a whole lot of we can't trust anything digital, and we're going to have to go back to the old safe words we had with our parents, if anybody remembers that, where we're going to have to verify instead of trust, going back to that same concept. For advances forward, if we learn to use AI really well, then we can start to use it for security to do what we've been talking about, which is to lock down the anomalies for human review. And so our spam filtering will hopefully get a little bit better as the spam is getting more sophisticated, or the phishing emails and all of that. I think that there will be more breaches of small companies because small companies don't make the news. That doesn't mean they don't get breached. It just means they don't make the news. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see me post a lot about small breaches, because if there's a data privacy law, et cetera, in Maine, where even if one single Maine resident is affected, you have to report it to the government and you get put on what we call the Maine wall of shame. So I think there's going to be more press and more money lost to data breaches. And I think that security, especially the human side of it and the small things that we can do, no matter what size of organization, so that we can be another level of security as people, I think that's going to be amplified. I'm staking my career on that. So.
Okay. I was
And I think
listening
there's
to
another side of that. Sorry, it is that's the software side, the AI. What we're seeing on the computer side, the ability to computate, and you know, back in the day you had your own little laptop. Now you can put 1,000 laptops together and get that compute processing power at the flip of a switch. And if the computing power is getting crazy right now, and what is it? Quantum computing that probably be available in 5 to 10 years is even, it's crazier.
Yeah. That, probably not 2 years, although I have seen some overly optimistic people say it's sooner than we think it is. So local-ish here is Bentonville, Arkansas, where Walmart is headquartered, and they do a cybersecurity conference called SparkCon. And that little thing that looks like an asterisk is called a Spark. So that's where that comes from. They do that every year. It's a one-day free conference. And they bring in some pretty amazing speakers, one of whom was a quantum expert. And they talk about the qubits that go in quantum computing, some of them software-based, some of them hardware-based, and how that is sooner than we think it is. And how that matters to us is with all that massive increase in computing power means that all these encryption algorithms that we use today to keep our data safe could be immediately cracked. There was a password manager, LastPass, that got breached, and it was all encrypted, but they took the vaults. If quantum computing comes around and those people haven't changed their passwords, then there's going to be capability, if people can pay the cost to use the quantum computing, to break those vaults that are sitting there waiting and heavily encrypted today. So yeah, that's a whole potential game changer with quantum computing. AI and quantum computing are the two biggest things to happen since the advent of the internet. And I'm old enough to have lived through the dial-up noise and all the things. I sent my first email in 1992. So I've had the privilege of living through this entire shift of how we live. And that will be another one.
Yeah.
One
It's funny
other
how you say that, because I'm a Novell engineer from many years ago.
Yeah, Novell. Haven't talked about Novell in a while. It's kind of like Paradox for DOS and the data side.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Quattro Pro and all those.
Quattro Pro.
Yeah, no, I remember those.
One other security concern that we have is hardware attacks for our water and energy producers.
Critical infrastructure, absolutely.
They're going to come under attack. They are already under attack, and there's not a lot we can do about it. But if we keep our tools clean, maybe we can help improve something somewhere.
Yes, and
Heather, thank you so much. We are at the end of our time, and we really appreciate you coming on. Folks, link to Heather on LinkedIn to see her many wonderful posts. I've been amazed at the breadth of goodness that she puts on LinkedIn to help everyone. We have a couple of people coming up to speak on the next few weeks. We do need some speakers, so if you know somebody who's interesting and has something for the BA community, have them contact me through LinkedIn, and I'll be glad to get them on our schedule. At the end of this month, we have Paula Bell. Paula is a longtime business analyst who has been working in the industry for probably as long as I have. She has been teaching, she's gone into coaching, and she's going to come on and talk about how to take your business analysis career to the next level and go into coaching as well as doing business analysis. So it's just a different avenue for you to take your career. Even if it's not something you're interested in doing personally, you're going to find out some interesting things about how to see the perspective of a coach as a business analyst, because we're all leaders and we all coach our teams, but we need to think about how we coach our teams. So come back and listen to her on the 29th. On March 14th, Robert Snyder is going to come talk about some very interesting concepts. I'll leave that to a little bit later. But once again, thank you so much, Heather, and we'll see all of y'all next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.